All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers. All these footsteps in the rain. All these shadows in my mind. With my reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. Don't let them take you away. Don't let them bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let them bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Writer's Block. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and on tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about the legend of the never-ending road. This is a story that takes place near Corona, California, which is a little bit less than 50 miles away from where Old Boy actually lives. It's a story that came off Creepypasta. Now, I'm going to read you the story first before we get into whether it's fact or fiction and all that kind of stuff. So here it goes. The Never-Ending Road. In Corona, California, there was once a road known by most locals as the Never-Ending Road. Specifically, the road's true name was Lester Road. Now, over 20 years later, the landscape of Corona has changed, and the Never-Ending Road is no more. However, years ago, Lester Road was an unlit road that people claimed became a never-ending road when driven at night. The people who made such a drive were never seen or heard from again. The legend became so well known that people refused to even drive Lester Road during the day. One night, like many teens my age, I drove up Lester Road, but only a short distance, and in my headlights it did look like it went on forever. Frightened, I quickly turned around, because if I continued up the road, I thought I might never return again. Perpetuation of the legend convinced local law enforcement to investigate. Lester Road took a sharp left turn at its end, and there were no guardrails. Beyond the curve lay a canyon, and on the other side of the canyon was another road that lined up so well with Lester Road that when viewed from the correct angle, especially at night, the canyon vanished from sight, and the road seemed to continue on up and over the hill on the other side of the canyon. Upon investigation of the canyon, dozens of cars were found, fallen to their doom, with the decomposing bodies of the victims still strapped to their seats. So that is the story of the never-ending road. Now, in investigating this to see if it was fact or if it was fiction, I read a whole lot of accounts from people that live in Corona, California, in that area. And they're pretty much unanimous when they say they've never even heard of this legend, and that the land around Corona, California is relatively flat. There's not a whole lot of canyons in that area. A search of Google Maps showed that there is no Lester Road in Corona, California, and the locals say that there never was. There is, however, a Lester Avenue. Now, Lester Avenue does come to a dead end, but at that dead end is a chain link fence and no canyon. So I'll be putting those pictures of the Google map search and the actual picture of the chain link fence at the end of Lester Avenue in this video. It'll be in the beginning when the music is playing, and I'll also put it right now in the video. So while you're watching the video, you're looking at it as I'm speaking right now. So I think that this story is probably fiction. Now, the first red flag is always and will always be that it's a creepypasta story. Anytime you see something on creepypasta, that means it's a work of fiction that somebody wrote and put on there. It's it's almost always going to be that way. It's almost never going to be a true story. Now, some of the stuff on creepypasta is based on true things. Okay? Like let's take Slender Man for example. Slender Man got made famous by creepypasta stories about Slender Man. Now, if you go back in the lore, there are creatures that are almost identical to Slender Man in lore all the way back to the Middle Ages and before. So that's a creature that most likely actually does exist, but they wrote fictional stories about in creepypasta. Now, this might be the same thing, because although there is no Lester Road in Corona, California that makes a left turn with a canyon and all that kind of stuff, even though that is not the case, there is a place in the United States where that actually does occur. And that is in Washington, believe it or not. The road is in northwest Washington state, okay? And if you look at the terrain around the road, it has a depression that looks like it's a canyon on the maps, okay? And it does have a sharp left turn and a road that lines up almost perfectly on the other side. This story could be based on an actual road that is located in northwest Washington. Now, I couldn't find a lot of stories about a lot of people dying there. You know what I mean? There was no story when I did the research that said that what took place in this story actually took place there in Washington. So in other words, they didn't have like the police find a canyon full of cars with decomposing bodies in it. That didn't happen there. But there is a road that does resemble very closely the road in the story of the Neverending Road that is in Washington. Now, whether the Neverending Road story is based on that road and maybe some event that happened there, there has been a few people that have died there on that road in Washington. So it very well could be that it's based on a true thing that actually happened on that road, but they just kind of embellished it and exaggerated it for the story and made the body count much higher and all that. I mean, that kind of stuff happens all the time. You see that in a lot of these movies where it says based on a true story, and then you actually look at the story and it's not based on a true story at all. You know what I mean? It's got a little nugget of the actual truth in it, and they just write a whole story around it. That's probably what happened here. Either this story was just completely invented out of whole cloth, or it's based on some little tiny nugget. Somebody died, or maybe a couple people died there on that road, so they decided to stretch it into this big urban legend kind of story. A couple other problems that I have with this story, other than the fact that the road doesn't actually exist, because in the story they touch on that, they kind of cover that a little bit, because they say that the road is no longer there, but it used to exist and all that kind of stuff. Now, I checked a whole bunch of maps on the internet, going way back as far as I could find of that area, and I never found on any of those maps a Lester Road. So as far as I know, it never existed. Okay? Now, I read a lot of accounts from people from Corona and in that area, and they all say the same thing, is that they've never heard that legend before. They never heard it. It's not something that is talked about there. You know what I mean? Because in some places you'll have little urban legends that pop up, and everybody talks about, oh, in those woods is where the Briar Witch lives or whatever, and she does this on a moonlit night and blah, blah, blah. You'll have that kind of stuff that happens in communities, but usually when it's a well-known legend like that, everybody knows it. And I didn't find one single account of anybody from the actual town of Corona that ever heard of this. So chances are it's completely false, and it's just a story that was written. Another problem I have with the story is, why would they build a road like that in the first place? And I wonder that about the road in northwest Washington. You know what I mean? Why build a road that goes in a canyon and makes a sharp turn like that? It makes it look like the road disappears. And you have another road on the other side of the canyon that looks like it continues. So that if you're driving and it's flat, it looks like the road just keeps on going. Why would you build a road that way? That's insane. Why wouldn't you put giant signs everywhere that say, hey, watch out, canyon, big ass hole in the ground. Make sure you turn, you'll die. Why don't you put some signs up? You know what I mean? No signs on this road in this story. So that makes me wonder too. That's kind of silly. And another problem I have with this story is the police. I mean, do we have a whole police force here made up completely of Barney Fifes? People that aren't even allowed to carry bullets because they might shoot themselves? You know what I mean? That kind of cop? Are all the police in Corona just completely stupid at that time period? Because if you think about it, they say that finally, after nobody would drive the road anymore, the police decided to investigate. Okay? So that's why the police decided to investigate, because everybody was afraid to drive the road. Not because you had tons of people going missing. No need to investigate that. You know, I mean, the way this would actually go down is somebody would be driving along and run off the road into the canyon and die, and they wouldn't show up for work the next morning. Their family wouldn't see them that night, and they'd call the police and file a missing persons report. And within days or a week, the police would go looking for the person. They'd say, where were they last? Oh, they were driving along Lester Road last time we saw them. Okay. So then they'd go look on Lester Road and say, oh, look, it's a giant-ass canyon. Wow, there's a car down there. And then they'd go down there, they'd find the person, they'd haul the car out. Case solved. That's the way it works in the real world. People just don't, like, crash into canyons and go missing and nobody ever looks for them. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen. So that is one of the major problems that I have with the story of the never-ending road, is they would have found the bodies way sooner. It wouldn't have been a bunch of decomposing bodies still strapped in their car. Now, the strapped in their car part, that's another problem I have with this story, because this story takes place back when, okay? This isn't a modern story. This story takes place probably like 40, 50 years ago. So during that time period, not everybody wore seatbelts. As a matter of fact, the majority of people didn't. It wasn't until I think 61 or 62 that they even started putting seatbelts in cars as a mandatory thing. And nobody wore them. You know, I remember growing up in the 70s and nobody wore a seatbelt ever. You know, if you put your seatbelt on, people would look at you like, what the hell are you doing? Are you crazy? Why would you put that on? That's so uncomfortable. It was very, very commonplace for nobody to be wearing their seatbelt. So the part of the story where they say they were found still strapped in their cars, that wouldn't be the way it happened if it happened back then. If you're lucky, you might find one person that's still strapped in their car, but the overwhelming majority of the people would not be strapped in their car. They would be sticking through the windshield or 20 feet away from the car in a couple different pieces because they flew out of the car when it crashed down the canyon because they weren't wearing their seatbelt. You wouldn't find them strapped in. You'd find them littered about the damn canyon. There'd be bloody bodies everywhere. That's the reality of the situation in that time period, because nobody wore their seatbelt. So there's a whole lot of holes in this story. A whole lot of holes. So I think as far as the matter of the never-ending road, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say it's completely false. It's not real. It does not exist. It's just a story that was written. A good fiction story written by somebody. It is creepy, you know, but it has a lot of holes in it where it doesn't stand up to logic or reason for very long at all. You know, now I know there's probably going to be some person out there that's going to say, no, wait, I had a cousin. He lived in Corona. He swears this is true. His ex-girlfriend's dog's brother's sister's cousin's friend, Sally, died in that canyon. I mean, that's going to happen, okay? But I've not found any actual accounts of anybody that lives there that says they know it, that they have anybody that died there, that they know anything about this. And I can't even find the canyon. You know, they might have taken out the road, but where's the canyon? Would they fill in the canyon too and replant it? I mean, come on. It's just not real. So as far as the never-ending road, I say completely false. Now, I'm going to do a lot more of these videos on a lot of these urban legend things, because a lot of people have begun asking me whether this is true and that is true. And because of the, Staring Into the Abyss radio show I do, where we do a lot of in-depth stuff about monsters and ghosts and goblins and demons and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to do a lot more videos on whether something is fact or fiction. You know what I mean? A lot of these urban legends. I'm going to touch on the Russian sleep experiment. I'm going to touch on, Slender Man a little bit. I'm going to touch on a lot of these things that get spread around Facebook and spread around all over the place. And everybody wonders, is this real or is this not real? Most of the time, what happens is they say, oh my God, look at this. It's real. And then somebody eventually says, no, that's not real. And then they have to go figure it out whether it's real or not. You know what I mean? And then sometimes you have yes, sometimes you have no. I'll do the research. I'll find out for sure whether it's real or not, and I'll let you know. Never Ending Road, not real. It is fiction. That's all for this episode. Thank you for joining me. Until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. Bye-bye.